next largest group are from India. So we have an Indian chef. He's also, there's lots of different Indian food that's provided in the mess for those Indian crew members. In fact, one of my favorites is dal. So whenever I go to the crew mess, I make sure I have some dal on my plate as well. So yeah, there's also true internet cafe. There's internet Wi-Fi around the ship now as well. So as long as you can connect to the Wi-Fi signal as well in the crew areas. There's crew bars. So they have little get-togethers where they can enjoy some time off. A lot of training that's going on board, so that people, if they want, they can progress through the ranks of Royal Caribbean. In fact, at the moment, our president of the company, Michael, he started as an entry-level purser on the purser's desk many years ago on the ships. So he's worked his way up to be president of the company. So that's possible. So people, that's fantastic. There's also some of our senior vice presidents. One of the guys, Raymond Scheider, he started as a busboy in the dining room, worked his way up on board the ships, went to be hotel director, moved into the office, now he's a senior vice president. So there you go.
And in the hiring process, crew members are hired through different agencies around the world, depending on what part of the world you're from. And you're hired through vetted by agencies for Royal Caribbean, and then you're assigned to a ship, and then you come on board and you work. So that's all we're chosen in the beginning, so to speak.
Great.
25 years as a captain. What is the worst thing you've seen?
I haven't had any bad days. You know, the biggest challenge we have is the weather. And I always say a ship is the safest place to be, because if there's any type of named storm, like a tropical storm that becomes a hurricane, we just turn around, go the other way. You may not go to where you expect it to be going, but we will keep you safe. We will turn around, we will put a lot of distance between us and the storm. We have very good weather forecasting these days. So, I mean, we're looking at the tracks of the storm. Nobody can predict exactly where that hurricane's going to go, but we give ourselves enough room that we're going to keep all of you safe. So if you're on a ship during hurricane season, the ship has to deviate from its planned itinerary, just go say thank you to the captain, because what he's doing is just keeping everybody comfortable and safe on board. So that's our biggest challenge, is the weather. It happens from time to time that we have to change itineraries, yes. It's happened to me.
We did last week.
You were doing it, was it last week? Yeah, I just came back from vacation, so luckily I missed that one. The ship is designed to, but you can't. I can tell you right now from experience, you wouldn't want to go through that. It was back in 1998. We were in Drydock in Mobile, Alabama, with the grandeur of the seas. I was the staff captain on board. Because when we're in Drydock, we take the ship out of water, and we do a lot of maintenance, underwater maintenance. I was the staff captain, second in command. I had some tanks that I had to recoat. We had a coating failure in the tank. And the best way for me to get into those tanks, I cut 10 holes in the bottom of the ship and moved my sandblasting equipment in, all my painting gear in, and we sandblasted the tanks, we're painting the tanks. The chief engineer had to replace the seals on the two propellers. He had to remove the propellers, pull the tail shaft out, and replace the seals. In the middle of this, we had an emergency meeting with the shipyard in Mobile, Alabama, because Hurricane Georges had decided to turn south of Key West and head straight up into the Gulf of Mexico, pointed right at Mobile, Alabama. So the shipyard said, you have to go to sea. Well, it's not easy to take a ship to sea that has 10 holes cut in the bottom and no propellers. So it took us 36 hours to get the ship ready to go back to sea. And at that point, Hurricane Georges was knocking on the door of Mobile, Alabama. We left the shipyard with 40, 45 knots of wind, We got out into Mobile Bay. Just before we got into Mobile Bay, the two pilots that were with us, they said, okay, we're going to leave you now. You guys go the way down the bay and out through the breakwater. Normally, the pilots will take you all the way down and then out to sea into the Gulf of Mexico. They weren't going to have any of that at all. They left in the river. And they said as they were leaving the bridge, good luck. And we were heading down the bay with 50 knots of wind. We got out safely into the Gulf of Mexico. Everybody knows that part of the Gulf of Mexico, there's a lot of oil rigs and pipelines, platforms, all over the place. There's only one route out into deep water, and that was taking us right into the eye of Hurricane Georges. So ordinarily, we would have been able to run and turn and go away from it, but because in this particular case, we were trapped up in Drydock, we didn't have the ability to get to sea right away, and it took us right to the middle of a storm, the named storm, which was hurricane force winds, over 60-foot waves. 115 knots of wind were recorded by the anemometer before it blew off the mast. We had heavy water coming over the bow. We had everything on the forward mooring deck was in bits and pieces. The whole bow of the Grandeur of the Seas was punched in about 1.5 meters. They tried to repair it in Drydock and straightened it a little bit. Even today, though, you'll see a little bit of a wiggle on the bow of the Grandeur of the Seas. We had all of the outdoor lighting fixtures were gone just from the force of the wind. All of the public address speakers, all of the alarm bells. We had heavy, heavy water coming over the bow and then coming down the outside promenade deck. You know, on those ships, they had a centrum area in the middle of the ship, and those centrum glass doors that slide, sliding glass doors, they're not really built to keep the water out. Well, at any given moment, there was about 1.5 meters of water on those open decks. And it was just pouring in through those glass doors, cascading down the centrum marble staircase, and with the lighting underneath, it created a beautiful waterfall effect that was mostly unplanned, mind you, but that's the kind of conditions we were in. Luckily, there were no guests on board. We had our crew on board, but no one was allowed to go out outside in the open decks. And the ship is built to survive it, but it becomes survival. Slow down, take each wave as it comes, and then wait for the storm to pass. A day and a half later, it was flat calm, beautiful weather. We were walking around the ship doing damage assessments, and we calculated more than $1.5 million worth of damage. However, the ship was put directly back into service. This dry dock period was over, and we were in worse shape than we were when we went into dry dock. And we carried on with the business, but the ship survived it, and that the ships are built to survive that. But it's not very comfortable, and none of you would appreciate having to go through that kind of experience. So that's why we turn and run. So I'm the best captain to be on because I've been through the middle of one of those storms with a cruise ship, and I'll go the other way and run and hide. So I won't go near one of those storms.
I just want to know what happened if someone gets very seriously ill.
We have a medical facility on board. We have 3 doctors, 5 nurses. We have a full-on medical emergency room that is designed for life support. All of our medical team are trained in advanced life support systems. Our doctors would then stabilize the patient, depending on where we were and what the medical requirement was. Of course, we do not do invasive surgery. We don't have a blood bank on board. If they needed to go ashore, we would then make the decision in coordination with the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center. In some cases, we've turned around and gone back to port. We may do a transfer of the patient at sea to a small Coast Guard or emergency response vessel. We may, depending on the position of the ship, do a helicopter evacuation. We do have a helipad located all the way forward on board the ship. Or we may just speed up and go to the next port and the patient's stabilized well enough to do that. So it all depends on the particular case that we're dealing with.
Go ahead. Right here.
I heard that there is a jail in the prison. Right now, is anyone in the jail?
Are you volunteering?
Yeah, sometimes we might have cases where we have to confine someone, and generally we try to do that in the stateroom that they're in. But if it is a case that cannot be controlled in such a manner, then we do have what we call a brig. We can call it the jail, but on a ship we call it a brig, and we do have a brig on board. And we call it alternative accommodation. And there's a door handle on the outside, but there's no door handle inside. There's one window in the door, and it's a padded room with no furniture. Yeah, so not a very pleasant place to be. But in sometimes we've had to resort to that, and then we would have law enforcement come on board at the next port to assist us with any type of situation. But believe me, this happens rarely that we have to go to use those techniques. But it is my obligation and my responsibility to keep order and to keep people behaved, I guess. I don't know. But mostly everybody's here to have a good time, and then sometimes people get out of hand, but we deal with it case by case as it comes up.
Did you get a discount if you spent a night there?
Sorry, that's a question. Well, I don't know where the microphone is.
Go ahead.
I want to know if you get a discount if you spend a night there in the padded room.
Not at all, no discount. In fact, most of the time if you spent the night there, you'd be getting off in the next port. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, we are producing all of our own fresh water, all of our own drinking water. We have what we call an economizer, exhaust gas boilers that are taking the exhaust gases from the engines and boiling seawater, taking the steam, condensing the steam, and then treating that according to public health with chlorine. We take a look at the pH levels, and we then put it into our potable water tanks, and that's what's coming out of the taps. And it's absolutely beautiful, pure distilled water. And we don't have the need, we're producing enough water, we do not have the need at all to bunker fresh water in any of the ports that we go to.
Great questions. Got one more back there.
Is that dry dock? How do you get a ship this big out of the water?
Well, there's two different kinds of dry docks, and the one that we'll be using is known as a graving dock, where they excavate a big hole in the ground, and there's a gate holding the seawater back. So, and then it's like basically a cement structure inside, and they then flood the dry dock. The water level comes up to the gate. They move the gate out of the way. The ship drives into the dry dock. They put the gate in behind, and then they have blocks all on the bottom of the dry dock, and then they pump the water out of the dock, and the ship settles down.